Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Community Journal. We're here this morning with Michael Lach, the Executive Director of the Harwich Conservation Trust, and he has a guest with him this morning, Don Wilding, and Michael will explain what Don is going to be doing. You have a great round of talks coming up.
That's right, Ron. Yeah, thanks so much for having us again.
Well, we're always happy to see you.
I'm glad to have Don here as well. And
Good.
I want to thank your fellow volunteers here and the staff of Channel 18. They do so much for the local community, and right here in this amazing resource, the community center. It's really terrific that we have these resources here. So, like you said, we have this amazing winter talk series sponsored by Harwich Conservation Trust. It's been very well received, some very interesting topics, and some intriguing opportunities to learn more about not only the natural world around us, but some of the history related to natural phenomena, including weather. And that's why we have Don here. Don came and spoke here as part of one of our more recent past Winter Talk series about Henry Beston, Outermost House. Really attracted quite a crowd. It was fascinating, heard wonderful feedback from folks. They learned a lot, and it was inspirational. So we brought him back, and we're psyched to have you here, Don, to talk about the 40th anniversary and the history related to the blizzard of '78, as well as other storms.
That was, and I do focus mostly on the blizzard, but yeah, we do mention those other storms. But when you look back, there was never a storm really that made such an overall impact on Outer Cape Cod as the blizzard of '78 did, because of how it changed the landscape and the overall impact it had. I mean, that's the reason you go to Coast Guard Beach now, and you have to take that shuttle bus down to the beach. Well, this storm is why.
Right.
And it just did so much. It kind of set the bar really high for all future storms.
And you have some interesting images you're going to
yeah,
share,
well,
right?
I see we have one up now.
Yeah.
That's the satellite photo.
Wow.
And you can see in that little sliver there's actually an eye, and then there's a little sliver of clearing that went over Cape Cod. So a lot of those bands of snow are going in over the South Shore, and that's why we had those huge snow totals. But out here on the Cape, it really wasn't a snow event. It was more of a tidal event. And that's why it got, things changed so much, and the tides here were just so, and here you can see what it did to the Coast Guard Beach Bathhouse.
That's the Coast Guard Beach, Coast Guard Beach in Eastham.
In Eastham.
The bathhouse,
that's
right
the
there.
old bathhouse that used to be there. And that had dunes and a parking lot around it, and that was just gone after this storm. There wasn't a heck of a lot left after the beach got leveled off.
Is that building gone, Don?
That building was pretty much flattened by the storm, and they had to burn down what was left of it because it was no longer. They were not able to. The structure of it wasn't stable. So, and here you see what Coast Guard Beach looked like before the storm.
Is that the size of the original parking lot?
Yes, it was. It was gigantic. It was. You see the Coast Guard station in the back.
Yes,
there,
yes.
And then you've got this huge parking lot, and the bathhouse is right up in front there. And there was also this little amphitheater area as well. So this was a gigantic parking lot, and people could just drive right up there and go down to the beach. And now all of that has been pushed back. And that area in front of the Coast Guard Beach now, the Coast Guard station.
Yes.
You can basically push that entire beach back to right in front of the Coast Guard station.
Right, to how people access it now.
And that's how it is now. Wow. So there is really no parking up there at that Coast Guard station except in the back.
I never realized it was that big.
It was a gigantic beach area. Now it's a very flat spit barrier beach. Back in those days, it was much wider. Prior to the storm, it was wider, and the dunes were much higher. And in Henry Beston's day, back in the 1920s, the dunes were just incredibly high. The beach probably reached down about 3 or 4 miles to the south before you hit the inlet opening. And that's Henry Beston's outermost house.
Is it really
part
when
of
that was
it
washed away?
that was floating around in Nauset Marsh after the storm. The storm swept away probably, 7 or 8 houses that were out on these were old beach camps like you see in Chatham. Now they're falling into the sea, and in some other areas of the Cape. But this was, the outermost house was the one everybody was most interested in because of its literary significance. But there were several other cottages and shacks that were also swept away in that storm.
Just a incredible weather event. I mean, the satellite photo almost looked like it had characteristics of what we typically associate with like a hurricane image almost,
Exactly.
right? I mean,
exactly.
it almost looks
It
like
actually did develop an eye.
No kidding.
When it came up here. It moved up the coast. It had some tropical origins. It was 2 storms that combined and moved up the coast from the Carolinas, and it got off to the coast of New England, and then it stalled because it was being blocked by a very large high pressure area to the north, a very cold high pressure area. And it just wasn't able to go anywhere. So it sat there off the coast of Massachusetts, spinning around, and the eye actually moved over the outer Cape. And so with that eye sitting there, it actually cleared up the next day. The snow had turned to rain here pretty quickly, but the wind was just incredibly high. There was probably gusts of over 90 miles an hour.
Wow, that's a hurricane.
And they also had to deal with an extremely high tide from the new moon. So that was something that Wallace Bailey of Mass Audubon had actually circled those 2 dates on the calendar, knowing that it was going to be a problem just from the regular tides. And then you had the storm surge on top of that.
Wow.
So when you got to the storm and everything that happened, the level of the ocean was just incredibly high at that point. So it was a recipe for disaster. And then you had all these other incidents all over the Cape where on the bay side, there were some areas lost 20 feet of sand of frontage just from that
storm.
from the water level. And they had it was a really interesting situation when you got to, you were trying to get out of Eastham the day after. They had a high tide that the water came in from both sides, from the cove and also from the wetlands behind the Smith property and which is now Wildcare. And
near the Rotary.
That marsh area by the Rotary. And you had areas in South Eastham that were underwater, that water was coming in, and you couldn't get from Eastham to Orleans because it was just so flooded in.
Wow.
There's a picture I have of a guy in a boat navigating around, I think it's on Governor Prince Road in Eastham, and
which is not far from Fort Hill.
it's right across from
Right-
Fort
right
Hill.
across
And that
from Fort
whole
Hill,
marsh
yeah.
system had washed out because of those high tides.
How long did it take for the waters to recede?
Oh, once it went to low tide, it
did,
receded,
yeah,
but they had a couple of instances where that happened, and you had people trying to drive through it too, which is, that's problematic with fresh water.
Right.
But salt water is not particularly kind either. There was a really interesting situation too, the day after the storm. The night before, someone had, a group of teenagers drove down into that parking lot, and they were in a Volkswagen Beetle.
This is the Coast Guard parking
Beach.
lot? Okay.
And they drove onto the beach, and what they didn't realize, this was in the dark, they didn't realize waves were coming in behind them.
Okay.
So it ends up, the waves take the Volkswagen, actually lift it, and washed it into the marsh, and these youngsters are in there scared to death.
Sure.
You know, thinking that, oh my God, this is it. And while they're floating around, they look up and they see a couple of headlights up in the Coast Guard station parking lot. And that was their guiding light, so to speak. They were afraid that if they had not seen that, they might have perished right then and there. So the next day, they came down and the water had receded and the Volkswagen was sitting there. They pulled it out of the water, and they turned the key, and it actually started. So imagine, Volkswagen. One of the interviews I have with Bob C. He says, "Geez, Volkswagen should have been there for their commercials.
Yeah.
It would have been great." So it was, you have some kind of quirky stories like that, and that was a good ending to that. Fortunately, there were no fatalities out here.
Right.
In this area, anyway. Yeah. But overall, just what it did to the landscape and everything, it's memorable. That's how people remember it out here.
Right.
There were thousands of people that came down to Coast Guard Beach.
Wow. Just to see the change.
Just to see the waves coming in and the bathhouse being smashed. I have an interview with Robert Finch, the writer, who says, everybody was down there, and he says every time the waves hit that bathhouse, the crowds would just cheer.
Wow.
and he says, why is that? What are we cheering?
Yeah, what is that? Right, curious. Right?
It was because everybody was just awed by what was going on, by the force of nature out there.
Force of nature, yeah. So it is amazing. And so your talk will be on Saturday, February 3rd, 2 p.m., right here in the Harwich Community Center.
Yep.
We have admission of $5 per person. We try and keep it really reasonable. We're so excited to hear more stories. And you actually have some live video interviews, is that right? Or still images?
I have a lot of still images. I also
audio.
I also interviewed several people 10 years ago this month for the 30th anniversary of the storm. I got together a bunch of different people who were there.
Wow.
Jack Clark, who was a ranger at the seashore, he's now with Mass Audubon. The late Noel Bile, the East Ham historian. Bob C., who was he's a radio newsman here on the Cape and in Boston. He was with a station in Orleans at the time. And Henry Lind, who's the natural resources officer in East Ham. Also Robert Finch. Some of the footage I've done for another project, he talks about the blizzard, and that's all included in this as well.
Wow.
So there's a lot of interesting photographs as well.
It should be great. That should be a great talk.
It's going to be a great talk.
It's proven to be pretty popular.
Yeah,
I've done it elsewhere.
Yeah, well, we're excited. We look forward to it.
I do too.
Yeah, and thank you for giving us a preview here.
Yeah,
sure, glad to. Thanks.
And now you're going to talk about something that's one of my favorites, the Owl Show.
Yes, we'll talk about another event.
That and the Wolf Show.
Yes.
I always love that. I filmed that twice.
That's right. You were there filming it. That's right.
I really enjoyed that. It was great.
Yeah. It is an amazing experience of seeing these animals up
Up
close.
close. It was great.
So we have our 12th annual live owl programs on Saturday, March 3rd. 12th annual, 12 years in a row we've been hosting them. And you know what?
Amazing.
People
I didn't
come
realize
back.
it was that long.
People come back year to year. They just never tire of seeing these amazing creatures up close. Right. Sometimes we hear owls at night at a distance. Rarely do we see them. But in this case, they're brought to us by Marcia and Mark Wilson, the owl educators.
Yeah, they're good.
There they are, Mark and
good
Marcia.
presenters.
They are good presenters. And they have state and federal permits which allow them to care for these owls. Each of these owls have a permanent disability. And so the Wilsons are allowed to bring these owls around for educational presentations. There's some photos from this event from years past, right there in the community center. Jim, this is a barred owl, B-A-R-R-E-D, making a comeback on the Cape. Here's a snowy owl. They'll also bring a snowy owl. Sometimes people see these snowy owls on some of our barrier beaches this time of year. We'll even have the largest owl species by weight in the world, which is the Eurasian eagle owl. Shown there. Here's a couple other international owls called the spectacled owl. They're from South America, and Marcia will bring them too. And then we have some other local owl species, such as the Screech Owl. Look at that little feisty owl. The ear tufts there. Probably she'll be bringing Screech Owl. She'll be bringing another local owl species, saw-whet owl. There you see on the far hand of Mark, the Screech Owl species on the closer hand in this image. And they'll even give some hooting lessons. They'll ask folks from the audience to come up and try their hand at responding and vocalizing with these owls. They'll show another owl species called, as our more commonly known owl, a great horned owl. And so we're going to have 6, 7 different species of owl right here in the gymnasium. Folks get to see these owls up close and personal. We've kept the prices the same for the past 12 years. We really, again, try and keep it reasonable. Ages 12 and up, 12 to adult, is $10 per person. Ages 5 to 11, $5 per person. And it's really not recommended for under age 5. And people can register online at our website, harwichconservationtrust.org, or you can come on down and pay at the door. There'll be 3 programs, 10 a.m., 1 p.m., and 3 p.m. And we're also fortunate to not only have those programs paid for by virtue of folks paying those admission prices, but also through business sponsorships. Cape Cod Times, Cape Cod Chronicle, Cape Codder, the Register newspapers, Birdwatchers General Store, Cape Cod 5-Cent Savings Bank. They've been our sponsors from the beginning, all of them.
Good support here.
And so it's a real collaborative effort to bring this live owl program to everybody's doorstep right here. So again, Saturday, March 3rd, see our website for more details. It'll be fun.
Oh yeah, that's great. That's great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for coming. And Don, this was very interesting to me because I wasn't living on the Cape during that blizzard, and I had never heard these stories. I didn't realize what had happened.
Yeah, a lot of people.
So you're I want to come to hear your presentation.
Oh, I'm glad
I'm
to
sure
hear
it'll
that.
be great. Really
February 3rd, 2 p.m. right here.
It's coming up.
Yeah.
Won't be far away.
Yep.
Good. That's great.
It's going to be
so
fun.
Nice to have you with us this morning, Don.
No, thanks for having
Mike,
me.
always glad to have you with us.
Thank
too.
you, Ron.
It's always a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks, Don.
Thank you.